Credibility is really currency for ourselves, for the members.
I think our job is not to create certainty where it doesn't exist.
This is Real State, a podcast from CSG South. Join us as we talk with policymakers and public leaders shaping state-level decisions across the South and explore how ideas move from policy to real impact.
Hello, welcome to Real State, and I'm your host, Lindsey Gray. Recently, we had the privilege of recording a few Real State episodes at the Southern Legislative Conference. This is where legislative leaders and professional staff from across our 15-member states and beyond have gathered to share ideas and strengthen state government. One topic that comes up repeatedly, whether we're talking about leadership, policymaking, or public trust, is credibility. In today's environment, institutions are often judged before people even walk through the doors. That makes credibility one of the most valuable assets any public servant can build, not only for themselves, but for the state governments that they represent. Joining me are two staff leaders from the Missouri Senate who think about credibility from different but complementary perspectives. Patrick Baker is the Senate Administrator for the Missouri Senate and oversees many of the operational and administrative functions that help the Senate serve both the legislators and the public. Josh Norberg serves as Assistant Director of Senate Research, where he helps lawmakers develop sound public policy and provides nonpartisan research and analysis throughout the legislative process. Patrick, Joshua, thanks for joining us and welcome to Real State.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Let's begin with a broad question. When you hear the phrase build credibility in public service, what does that mean to each of you? Patrick, let's start with you.
Credibility is really currency for ourselves, for the members. In the Missouri Senate, I serve as the administrator and including the members and their staff. It's a 200-person organization. And so we have credibility inside the organization, right? Because it's a business as well as a legislative body. And so we have to function. We have HR and we have accounting department, and we have to work together as colleagues. And then we work and serve at the pleasure of the members of the Missouri Senate. And so for them, their credibility as an institution and currency with each other, right? If they are not trusted by their colleagues early on in their career, it taints that relationship. So it's the currency in which we trade day to day.
Josh, you spend much of your time supporting the policy process itself. How do you think about credibility from that perspective?
So I'm in the Senate Research Office, and what we do is really help the legislators enact, their priorities through the legislation. And so what I really think it's about is them trusting your judgment. That comes from a process where, you are reliable every day. You show up and you work hard. You tell them honestly what you think the problems are, what their, priorities are. And you follow through on your commitments, and you have humility to say, I don't know when you don't know. And so over time, when you do that, that builds credibility. I feel like it's more of a feeling than an evidence-based. It's evidence-based, but it's not based on your degree or, where you came from. It's based on them seeing you help them navigate the process all the way through. And so if they can't trust your judgment, then that's really, what are we doing there? We're there to help them. And so they need us to be credible, and they want us to be, and they're looking for it.
People often say credibility isn't something you're given, it's something you earn. Patrick, in legislative leadership, what actions actually build credibility with members, staff, and stakeholders over time?
Yeah, I don't think there's a shortcut. I think it's the key there is time. It's being honest about what you're going to deliver and how you're going to deliver it, and then when you're going to deliver it. Managing those expectations for me with my two constituencies that I mentioned earlier. You have the staff and you have the membership, and then the members interact with their colleagues. And so you have to, as Josh said, sometimes be afraid to say, don't be afraid to say, I don't know. If you provide inaccurate information, sometimes it can be viewed as malicious, like you have an agenda, or you're too eager to just answer the question. And so I have to, when folks come into my office, I have to remind myself that I don't know what their intent is behind their question, and I shouldn't really assume, right, that I need to ask the questions I need to ask. And if that means that I have to take more time to get back to them and answer the question, then that's what needs to happen. So I can provide them the best answer possible.
Is there a moment in your career where you realized credibility could take years to build, but only moments to lose?
Yes, but not in the traditional sense. I think when we hear that question, I think back to a few years ago. Trust was given to me as an example of marbles in a jar, right? And we have to have a relationship, and we build that relationship over years. And for every act that we have that's good, you get a jar and you get a marble in my jar, and vice versa. And then in one swift act of defiance or maliciousness, that trust can just be eroded. That jar just gets knocked off the table, and all the marbles are scattered. But to your question, I realized that can be lost, not in that manner, but in Missouri we have term limits. And so it's not that the trust was lost. Sometimes it's not present. And that's not maliciousness on the person I'm interacting with, that they don't know me. And so while I may have taken it for granted that next year's my 27th legislative session and it's my 10th as administrator, and I know that I do, or I believe that I do well for the body, and that I've interacted with past senators very well or done a good job for them. I've never interacted with this senator or their staff member. And it's not that they don't trust me. It's that the trust or the credibility isn't present yet. And so term limits vacates that credibility sometimes, but not in that traditional sense. It's not that I've lost it. It's just that it's zeroed out and I have to earn it again with the new member or their staff.
And Josh, let's talk about policy. Legislators face increasingly complex issues, from artificial intelligence to cybersecurity to workforce shortages. How do professional staff ensure legislators receive information they can trust, especially when there's no shortage of competing data and opinions?
Well, I think it just takes intellectual discipline, really. In our office, we use primary sources as much as possible, especially with the emergence of technologies like AI. There's not always a definitive answer. In the legal field, you hear lawyers all the time saying, well, it depends. And that really is true. And so I think our job is not to create certainty where it doesn't exist. Our job is to tell them what we know, tell them what we don't know, and help them navigate what the trade-offs are. And, they need information, but they don't want us to make it up, right? They're trying to make the best policy they can. And so, you just have to stay disciplined and not give in to pressure to try to give an answer if you think that there is one or if there's not one. And so, I just think you need to stay in your lane and keep your eye on the ball and not make it up, basically, because they can smell that and they're always paying attention. And they need you to be the anchor there for, reliable information.
How important is it that legislative staff remain trusted as nonpartisan experts, regardless of which party is in control?
Well, it's everything. I mean, legislatures are permanent institutions, but the legislators come and go. So the minute we break the trust, then, it's kind of over, leaders have a responsibility, especially in our roles. There's layers to credibility, right? I have my credibility as an individual, but we have it as an office as well. And so I think we as leaders have to, enforce that nonpartisanship, especially. We tell all of our new staff, that's one of the first things we tell them, how the importance of maintaining neutrality. We don't really do social media. We don't, of course, we have opinions, but we don't post them. We don't talk about them. They don't get in our way. So as leaders, we need to do that, because if one person in your office, violates that trust, then it can impact everyone else in the office. I could be the most credible person there, and they'll still distrust us because, they had, some incident with someone. So it's really the most important part of what we do, because without that, everything else is, goes by the wayside.
CSG South brings together not only elected officials, but also the professional staff who makes legislatures function every day. Patrick, what role do professional staff play in strengthening the credibility of an institution?
The senators rely on the answers that we may look up for them, but also it's not just our interaction with the senators. Legislative activities isn't solely contained within the legislature. The governor's office, for example, gets to weigh in on whether or not there's going to be a veto. And because the governor gets to say there in the matter, the governor gets to say during the process. And so often the senators are interacting with the executive branch departments. And so, building that credibility without bias is important. And we have to realize that when the senators come in and ask us questions, they're taking that information and they're going and they're using it. And so if we presume why they're asking, if we presume intent, we presume an outcome, we might introduce our own bias. And so we have to explore the topic with them. I've not always been the administrator of the Senate. Point in my career, I was a lobbyist. I did work for private associations. I worked for the executive branch and departments. And I've received briefings from staff. And we had a staff member, although not intentionally, appeared unsure or was guessing in a manner, so to speak, about the information they were providing. And they got stopped by their supervisor. They said, okay, you can't do that. Patrick's internalizing the information. He's getting ready to go across the street and brief, XYZ official. They're going to use that information. So this is our time to get it right. So we have to stop. We have to make sure we get it right. So in our role now, I don't take that for granted. When they come and they're asking about the process, how this legislative process works, I don't presume what they're going to do with it. I just have to know that I've given them the right information, or I'm directing them to the right person. And honestly, sometimes they forget what my role is. My role is not legislative, and they'll come and ask me a question about policy, and I have to be careful not to cross that line. So I, in my past life, helped shape policy. I don't do that now. I work equally for the majority and minority members, and I have to stay in my lane, and I have to direct them toward the Senate Research Department or the Senate Appropriations Department that'll help them with those policy questions. If it's a process question, I have to direct them toward the Secretary of the Senate. And so by not venturing outside my lane, then I gain that credibility with the members.
And Josh, would you add anything to that from the research and office perspective?
Lindsey, I think the only thing I would really add is just the importance of continuity. We've got a lot of staff. We've got decades of experience. And we've been lucky enough in our office to keep people around long enough to gain institutional knowledge. And I think of the role of staff as like the bones of the place, right? We're not the muscle. We're not meant to be seen. We don't move the body, but we're there to help the thing stand up straight. And so we keep everything going, but we're not there other than to help them. And so we use our, we have term limits in Missouri. I know some other states in the South do as well. The legislators come from all sorts of walks of life. And so we're the ones who retain a lot of the knowledge and the policy expertise. And so we can, issues come and go, they come back up. We can tell them what the historical context is, what we've tried before, what the pitfalls were. And so I think developing that and building that into the institution is crucial for helping them do their jobs.
In an era of social media and rapid news cycles, what practices help ensure that speed does not come at the expense of accuracy or integrity? And how do you help your message break through the noise? Patrick, we'll start with you.
For us, it's consistency. So we have a process that's followed in the Missouri Senate, and those rules are set down by the body itself or by the administration committee, and that's a member committee, standing committee. It has 3 members of the minority, 2 of the minority. The rules are voted on by the body, and all these things guide us through what our process should be. And so by following that every time after a bill is perfected, it has to be engrossed, which means it has to be read by staff to ensure that changes were made properly, that is perfected and it reflects the intent of the body. And so by following those steps every time, we gain credibility with the membership. We gain credibility with the public that we're going to have a hearing. We're going to follow the open records or the public meeting laws. We're going to give 24-hour notice. Those things build credibility, that consistency that it can be relied upon. Slowing down the process, we don't have laptops on the Missouri Senate floor. We don't have electronic voting. The idea is that the members still have to pick up a piece of legislation and they have to read that legislation. They have to understand it. And it's not just something that's pushed out to them that they ignore, that it's a physical copy, and that there are still those traditions that we follow, and we follow them in consistent manners. And hopefully that provides us the same credible product every time.
And Josh, anything to add?
I think it comes down to preparation, really. In our office, we have a lot of deadlines, some reasonable, some not. As our policy colleagues across the southern states can attest to, we have bill filing deadlines, so they don't care if you have 100 other things to do. If they ask you the day before for a bill, you get it done. We draft amendments on the fly on the floor. And they want them because they want to stand up and offer them. So you need to be quick. But I don't think that you need to sacrifice accuracy for speed. If you prepare, you don't get speed by taking shortcuts or skipping work. You do the work beforehand, and that allows you to be quick when you're asked and when you're called on. At the same time, you need to resist the pressure sometimes to be quick and tell them, well, I need a minute to think about this, or this is going to take a little more time than you want. Because sometimes that's the most credible thing to do. If, I'm not going to, do something, at less than my best quality so that I can get it out. I want it to be the best thing because that's what they're going to remember. They're not going to remember that they got it 5 minutes later. They're going to remember I got exactly what I asked for. And the time horizons are sometimes not as tight as they imagine them to be. And so, like Patrick said, we're a slow moving floor. We read our amendments or we have them physically distributed. So there's always time. They can always stand up. And so if you do need to take the time, it's important to do it. But also, if you're not prepared, that's not an acceptable way to ask for time, right? Do the work beforehand. Have a process set up. In my policy role, I do tax policy. And if I'm asked to do a tax credit, I don't think about what do I need for this tax credit? I've thought of beforehand, what do I need in general to draft a tax credit? So I take what I'm given, I can just plug it into the process and get it done quicker than if I'm doing everything from reinventing the wheel every time. So I think if you have a process that works for you and you've done the work, you can have both speed and accuracy. But again, I don't think you ever need to sacrifice one for the other.
Healthy disagreement is part of democracy. People won't always agree on policy outcomes. But Josh, how can lawmakers maintain credibility with constituents who strongly oppose a particular vote or policy?
I don't think credibility requires agreement. I think what voters want is a fair process, right? Of course, you're always going to have, a single issue voter or something like that. If they disagree, you're lost to them, right? But I think if the process is fair and you give people a chance to be heard and you take them seriously and you acknowledge the opposing viewpoints and everything's done out in the open, people can accept maybe something they didn't quite want, right? But it's when you start doing things in the dark or you force things through, that's when people's hackles gets raised. And so I think people just want to be treated fairly. The credibility comes from treating people fairly. It's not from, having 100% voting record with one group A or group B, right? So I think the importance of, letting people get to committee and, have appropriate time for testimony and giving opposition time on the floor to voice their displeasure or I think that's the crucial component that we need to keep our eye on.
Patrick, how should public officials respond when they make a mistake? What distinguishes a response that rebuilds credibility from one that erodes it further, in your opinion?
Lindsey, there's a word for how senators should act. It's called being senatorial. I think members can interpret that however they want. I know it when I see it. The short answer is they could be honest. But I tell them, you need to be senatorial. If they question what does that mean, I tell them they already know what it means. They know what it means to be senatorial. If they stop and they reflect about the actions they've taken or the actions they're about to take. And so if they've made a mistake, be honest about it. A few times over the last couple of years, I've been really proud of the Senate body. I can't even tell you the bill issues at the moment because I don't pay attention to it in that way. I pay attention that they're debating. The debate hasn't stopped because when it stops, there's a problem. Either there's a problem legislatively, procedurally, or there's a problem, our microphones aren't working, right? But they debate, and as long as they're debating, the process is working. If they've made a mistake and they're honest about it, the times that I've been the most proud of the body is that the next day, unbeknownst to me, there's a motion to reconsider a vote they took the previous day. And I asked someone, and they said, well, we discovered a mistake in the bill. They've talked to everyone, including the senators who opposed the bill or voted against it. And everyone's in agreement. They're going to roll back the bill. They're going to make the change. They're going to fix the mistake, and they're going to revote the bill, and no one's going to stand in the way. They're going to honor the action the body took to pass the bill, and they're not going to renew a filibuster, or they're not going to stand in its way as we try to fix it, because they've come to the decision as a body that they may not be in agreement that the bill should have passed, but as individual members, they're not going to stop it because the bill is going to go forward, and it should be at least the best that it can be. And so I've been very proud. They've done that several times over the last couple of years if they discovered a mistake. And so to me, that's the epitome of being a senator, is they are acting senatorial.
Without getting into specific legislation, are there practices within the Missouri Senate that you believe consistently strengthen institutional credibility? Things that have become part of the culture rather than just policy? Patrick, we'll start with you.
Yeah, early in my career, I worked for an individual senator, and it was chair of a committee. And an opposing senator come in, and she asked for a copy of a committee substitute that hadn't yet publicly been distributed, and I gave her a copy. And after she left, someone in the room said, "You give her copies of confidential substitutes?" And I said, "Sure. She'll see it soon enough, and if it helps us speed up questions when we come to perfection vote on the floor, all the better we are. Because by not giving it to her, right, I upset her, and I could damage our odds of passing, right, a bill. In the Missouri Senate, if a senator walks onto the floor and asks any staff member, it doesn't matter if they're nonpartisan staff, it doesn't matter if they're partisan staff, the partisan staff of the opposing party. The senator walks in and asks any staff member what bill we're on, what amendment we're on, which substitute we're on, what this bill does, what does this amendment do. That staff answers them honestly. And I have not found a case where that's not true in my 27 years of being in the legislature. And it's something that I've had new staff come in and comment to me on, that they've noticed it and that they're very impressed by it, that their boss can walk onto the floor, ask a question of the most partisan staff member of the opposing party, and they'll get an honest answer. It's something that would be so easy to just lie to them or not answer because you don't like them or you don't like their politics. And partisan staff answer that question honestly. And so it's something that's just ingrained. The members may fight, but the staff, or the members might fight or disagree, but the staff answer those questions honestly. So it gives credibility through all the staff, whether partisan or not, that we're going to be honest and forthcoming with the senators when asked questions.
And Josh, same question for you. What practices within the Senate do you believe strengthen institutional credibility?
I think the ultimate goal with institutional credibility is really to create an institution that outlasts any single individual. That's codified in our term limits, but also that applies to staff as well. I think Patrick's mentioned we have very specific rules and processes we follow. In our office, we have a rigorous review process where everything that we draft is viewed by more than one or two people before it even gets to the floor and goes through that process. So we have every department in our building has an incredibly professional staff with I have not done the math, but it's got to be decades and decades of experience. And I think what a credit to Patrick and his time as an administrator is he's really made a concerted effort to kind of ensure that the goal of the leader is not to have your name on the door. It's to make sure that when you're not there anymore, that the place goes on as it did before, and hopefully better than when you got it. So there's a lot that we do that we don't really think about anymore. And that's when it becomes culture, right? So we just do things that way because that's the right way to do them. And I think that's what gives the members the confidence that they can come in. They know if they talk to the secretaries at the dais, they're going to be doing their job properly. They know when they talk to research, they're getting the best possible answer they can get. If they go see Patrick, he's going to tell them what they need, whether they can do it or not. And it has nothing to do with who they are. So I think that lets them do their job, which is why we're there. And they don't have to think about those things. And I think that ultimately leads to, the best possible policy outcomes because they can really focus on that. And I think we've all done a good job of, working on that. And it takes a concerted effort by everyone involved.
For newer legislators and staff members, what habits or principles are most important for establishing a reputation for credibility early in their careers? Patrick?
I know I sound like a broken record, but it's be honest. It's if you know, if you don't know, you find out the answer, and you take that time. I've watched senators of the opposing party ask their colleagues of questions about insurance, right? We only have, 2 or 3 lawyers in the Missouri Senate at the moment, right? And so they get certain questions deferred to them about the criminal justice code. And they don't necessarily ask their colleague that's a fellow Republican or their colleague that's a fellow Democrat. They'll ask them because they're attorneys. We might only have one senator that knows or in their everyday life deals with banking, right? And so they become the subject matter expert. And the members respect that. And so you become a known quantity. We have a partisan staff member who used to be nonpartisan staff. He is the subject matter expert in the state of Missouri for the foundation formula for education. His answers are trusted so much that the sitting governor has placed him on a commission to evaluate the current foundation formula. So he is the expert, and they're of opposing parties, because this staff member is honest every time a elected official comes and asks him. He'll answer the questions for representatives and senators alike, partisan staff, nonpartisan staff, and have an honest conversation with you, even though you might be taking that information and trying to craft an amendment that his party opposes. He recognizes that the information he has is vital, but he doesn't hold it hostage, right? He equally shares it with all people in the state when asked to help try to find a solution for them. And that I point him out to our newest members and our newest staff to say he's an example of what we all should be striving for, right? That there is no bias in his answers. Here are the facts. This is what the formula does. This is what we did in the 80s. This is what we did in the 90s. If you do this, you're now essentially double hold harmless, et cetera. And so he doesn't take that for granted that he holds that information, but he doesn't hold it hostage either.
And Josh, I'm going to toss the same question to you. What habits or principles are most important for people involved with the General Assembly that help boost credibility early?
I think particularly for staff members, I would focus on being prepared, organized, and on followed through, right? It's really easy in our roles to get overwhelmed by workload, particularly as session moves on and things are moving quickly. I think if you create a process for yourself, whatever that looks like, I have one for myself. It may or may not work for someone else. But if you can eliminate as many decision points as you can, then you increase your bandwidth, right? You need to be prepared. No one expects new staff members to be policy experts on their first day or the first year or the first 5 years, really. But if you're not prepared or organized, people can sense that immediately. And I think that people are always paying attention. They're willing to forgive. They don't expect miracles. They're willing to, forgive you for saying, I need to go look that substantive topic up. But if you can be prepared and be organized, then it all becomes easier. And follow through, I think, is maybe even more important, because when you tell a legislator, well, I'm going to look that up and I'll get right back to you, go do it, right? Don't sit on it for a week and be like, oh yeah, I'm still working on that. If you have a free moment, go do it and get it to them. Don't just sit. I think people, when you tell somebody, particularly in our jobs, if you tell them you're going to do something, they expect you to have it done because they're relying on you to do it. They're not going to forget and expect you to just not come back to them. So I think if you do those things, you're going to build a reputation for yourself. It's not just that member that's paying attention. It's, your superiors, every senator that people talk in the building, of course. So people are paying attention and they know when you're prepared. They know when you're reliable, and it has nothing to do with your policy expertise. Of course, that comes with time and experience, but the other stuff are things you can do on day one, and you make things so much easier on yourself by doing them. And so I found that to be very helpful in my career.
Patrick, looking ahead 5 to 10 years, what do you think will be the greatest challenge to maintaining credibility in public service? And what gives you optimism that it can be met?
I struggled with this one, Lindsey. So I'm a Gen X and maybe a cusp. I'm an Xennial. Born late enough in the Gen X that I identify with them, but late enough that I still embrace technology. But I probably sound like a boomer when I say AI, right? Or social media. Like, these are things that challenge our credibility because you're on the defensive. It's, I found this online, right? Or AI tells me this, right? I don't know where they've gotten the answer. I'm not saying AI is wrong, right? Or that it can't do what it does very, very well on things that I've seen it do. But simply because it's online doesn't make it the truth, right? I think of that commercial, I'm a French actor, bonjour, right? And he's clearly not French. And it's like, what gives me optimism is that hopefully we're still here doing this job and that we're verifying it, and that verification of the information is what's going to, pull us through that. I think AI can do certain things very well, but social media has a lot of information out there, and someone still has to sift through the fog and the noise and find that truth on the facts and verify it for the members to use. And so we have a dedicated research department to help those members craft legislation, a dedicated appropriations department to help them draft budget bills. And so technology will advance at a pace that I can't even imagine, and AI will find its place eventually in our legislative process. I'm sure of that. But you still have to be there, right? We have presentations on it here at CSG South, and it's trust but verify, right? So someone still has to verify it. So I'm optimistic that we'll still be needed, that AI won't be able to replace us, and that because we built a credible Senate staff, that will still be utilized.
And Josh, I think we're both millennials and on the millennial Gen X cusp. So how does this resonate for you when looking, 5 to 10 years ahead?
At the risk of being redundant, Lindsey, I think I have to also say kind of technology and information overload, and being able to decipher and pick out what is important. We've got unprecedented access to amounts of information and the speed at which you can get it. And that makes it incredibly difficult. If I need 2 hours to go look something up, a member can go to AI and get a result, or go to Twitter and see someone saying what they want to hear. And that takes, 10 seconds. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge, is breaking through that. And, Patrick and I were discussing a member earlier who was upset about a potential policy change we were contemplating in the Senate. And, they had heard it was going to, cost one thing, or it was going to be one thing. And, all it takes is to sit down and say, well, here's why it's not. And I can, if you walk them through that, that's useful. And I think that's also part of the optimism is, I think technology and AI makes judgment more valuable, not less. You hear about people drafting bills with AI, and you can tell, right? These are not, the tools are not there yet. And even once they do get there, you still need someone to evaluate the, what is important in these, if it's policy research, what do the members need to know? They need people to do that. And I think I'm optimistic that, our members will see the value in that, even as AI makes things easier for them in some ways. I think it's a great tool. I use it a lot in my personal life, and also, for work, but it's a tool. It's not something that's designed to give you the answer. It's maybe help give you a starting place, but you still need someone to, quite frankly, evaluate whether it's not worth anything, or whether it's worth, discussing with the member. So I think that's probably what we're all dealing with now, and we probably will for quite some time. I try to maintain some optimism about it. And I think I have seen no reason to not be at this point.
As we close, I'll end with a question we ask all of our guests. What is the best piece of professional advice you've ever received, and how does it shape the way that you approach leadership today?
I was thinking about this one, and this isn't advice I was given personally, though I would have loved to. We're in a basketball city, Lindsey, basketball state, and I'm a huge Spurs fan. And I was thinking about Greg Popovich, and he's one of the, most respected leaders we have today, especially in sport, but just in generally. And he talks about this idea from Jacob Riis about the stone cutter hammering away on a stone, right? He hits it, nothing happens. He hits it, nothing happens. And after 100 hits, it finally cracks on the 100th hit. And he knows that it's not the 100th hit that broke it. It was the cumulative effect of all 100. And I think that's how credibility works, right? You don't earn it by saying I got a degree. You don't earn it by writing a single memo or drafting a particular bill or performing well in a single meeting. It's doing the same things over and over every day, working hard. And, it's not easy, but you have to have patience and know that, every time you do follow through, someone's noticing. And after 10 years, the credibility's there. You don't have to worry about it. I think the advice I would give is, just be patient and know that what you're doing matters. And if you do it the right way, everything else will take care of itself. And you're going to be where you want to be.
So I was told halfway through my career, there's no bad news. There's only how we react to it. And so it's something I've taken to heart, and I've given the same advice to the directors in the Missouri Senate. Don't be afraid to come to me with something you think I'm going to be upset about. Because if you wait a day or two, I've lost that day or two to work the problem, right? To think about the problem and how we're going to solve it. In the interim, if there's a delay, that's fine. I've got plenty of time to work the problem. During session, I don't have that kind of time. Is not a luxury, and we might have to pivot and work to solve the problem very quickly. And so to my fellow Ted Lasso fans, right, if I can't control my emotions, then by all means, let our emotions control us, right? And, Ted Lasso's showing sarcasm to Roy Kent. So I have to be very aware that if I'm going to ask them to not be afraid to come and share bad news with me, then I have to be very careful to not let my emotions ruin the conversation, right? That my door has to be open. I'm willing to receive the information, and then that together we're going to come up with a solution and work the problem. And so I'm asking something of them, and I have to be willing to give something back, and that is, controlling that emotion, because we just have to figure out what went wrong, how we're going to fix it, how we're going to prevent it from happening again. Because during session, I have no time to sit and think for a long time about how we're going to solve the problem.
Patrick and Josh, thank you both for joining us at SLC this year and for carving out the time to share your leadership, expertise, and experience. We know the Missouri Senate is in very good hands with both of you.
Thank you, Lindsey. Thanks for having us.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to Real State. For more conversations like this and more about the work of CSG South, visit csgsouth.org. I'm Lindsey Gray. Let's keep it real.
Thank you for joining us today on Real State, where we keep it real about what really matters.